The stars were quiet in the Zephyrian system. They had been quiet for 300 years, ever since the Great Accord was signed by every major species in the galaxy. The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated peacefully between two blue suns, its silver hull reflecting the twin lights like a jewel in the darkness. Inside the station, Ambassador Kethzon walked through the peaceful corridors. His forearms moved gracefully as he reviewed the daily reports on his datapad. Trade was good. No conflicts anywhere in the galaxy. The patrol ships reported only peaceful activities across all sectors. It was exactly how things should be. The Zephyrians had worked hard to create this peace. After the last great war that nearly destroyed half the galaxy, they had convinced every species to sign the Great Accord. The rules were simple but strict. No military ships larger than a frigate could exist anywhere in galactic space. All weapons of mass destruction were banned. Any conflicts had to be solved through talking, not fighting. It had worked perfectly. The warrior species like the Kraloth had become peaceful traders. The aggressive Thekmari had turned their energy to art and science. Even the stubborn Veltar had given up their war fleets and focused on learning instead. The galaxy had become a place where children could grow up without fear of war. Kethzon reached the main observation deck just as his aide rushed up to him. The young Zephyrian's scales were bright with excitement. "Ambassador, we have a new contact. A ship just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of our system." Kethzon felt a familiar thrill. A new species meant new possibilities for trade, culture, and friendship. In the 3 centuries since the Accord, they had welcomed 17 new species into their peaceful community. Each one had gladly agreed to give up their weapons and join the galactic family. "What do we know about them?" he asked. "The ship is small, clearly designed for exploration. They're broadcasting on standard frequencies and seem to want to talk. They call themselves humans, and they come from a planet called Earth." Kethzon nodded approvingly. An exploration ship was always a good sign. Warlike species usually arrived, in battle fleets, not single scout ships. He had seen this pattern many times before. A peaceful species would send out explorers to make contact, and within a few months, they would be signing the Accord and joining the galactic community. "Bring them to Docking Bay 7. I'll meet them personally." The human ship was indeed small. As Kethzon watched through the bay's windows, he could see it was built for long-distance travel, not combat. The hull was smooth and practical, with no visible weapons. The ship's name was painted on the side in simple letters: Endeavor. When the airlock opened, 3 humans stepped out. They were bipedal like many species, but shorter than Zephyrians and covered in what looked like artificial skin. The leader was a female with dark hair pulled back in a simple style. She wore a plain uniform with no military decorations. "I am Ambassador Sarah Chen of Earth," she said in clear, simple galactic standard. "We come in peace, seeking friendship and understanding with the galactic community." Kethzon smiled, his scales shifting to a warm blue color. The same words almost exactly that every new species had spoken when they first arrived. It was like a ritual that proved their peaceful intentions. "Welcome to Nexus Prime, Ambassador Chen. I am Kethzon of the Zephyrian Confederation. We are very happy to meet the human people." Over the following weeks, Ambassador Chen and her team learned about galactic civilization. They visited trade centers, research stations, and cultural exchange programs. They saw how different species worked together, sharing knowledge and resources without conflict. Chen asked many questions about the Great Accord. She wanted to understand exactly how peace was maintained across such a vast area, with so many different species. "The key is simple," Kethzon explained as they stood in the Hall of Accords, where the original treaty was displayed. "No species can have the tools of war. Without weapons, conflicts must be solved with words. Without war fleets, no one can threaten their neighbors." Chen studied the treaty carefully. Her team took detailed notes about every clause and requirement. They seemed very interested in the exact wording of each rule. "What about species that refuse to sign?" she asked. "It has never been a problem," Kethzon replied. "Every civilized species recognizes the value of peace. Only primitive, savage races would choose warfare over civilization." and we have never encountered such a species in our expansion into the galaxy. Chen nodded thoughtfully. And the enforcement? How do you make sure everyone follows the rules? The patrol fleets monitor all systems. Any ship larger than a frigate is immediately investigated. But mostly, enforcement is not needed. When a species gives up their weapons and experiences true peace, they never want to go back to the old ways. After a month of discussions, Chen announced that Earth was ready to join the Great Accord. The signing ceremony was held in the main council chamber, with representatives from dozens of species watching. Chen stood at the podium with the treaty in front of her. The people of Earth have seen the wisdom of galactic peace. We gladly agree to dismantle our military fleets and join the community of civilized worlds. The ceremony was exactly like 17 others before it. Chen signed the treaty with a simple pen, just as every other species had done. The council members applauded politely. Another primitive species had chosen civilization over barbarism. How long will it take to dismantle your military vessels? Keth Zahn asked as they walked. From the chamber. The process has already begun, Chen replied. Our defense council voted to scrap the entire fleet. Within 6 months, Earth will have only civilian ships and the small patrol frigates allowed by the Accord. Keth Zahn was impressed by their efficiency. Some species took years to fully give up their military ways. The humans seemed to understand. Immediately, that weapons had no place in a civilized galaxy. As the human delegation prepared to return to Earth, Chen made one final request. We would like to establish a permanent embassy here on Nexus Prime, and we hope to begin regular trade and cultural exchanges. Of course, Keth Zahn agreed enthusiastically. Welcome to the galactic family, Ambassador Chen. Your people have made the right choice. The Endeavor departed the next day, carrying news of Earth's acceptance into galactic society. Keth Zahn watched it disappear into hyperspace with satisfaction. Another success for the Great Accord, another species choosing peace over war. In his office that evening, he updated the galactic database. Earth, peaceful explorers, quick to accept civilization, no military threat. Status, full member of the Great Accord. The stars remained quiet, around Nexus Prime. 300 years of peace continued without interruption. The galaxy slept soundly, protected by treaties and goodwill. No one noticed the small notation in Earth's file that Ambassador Chen had insisted on adding. It was buried deep in the technical specifications, written in legal language that few beings bothered to read. The notation specified that Earth agreed to dismantle all military vessels as defined by Section 12A of the Great Accord, but Section 12A had a very specific definition of what counted as a vessel, and the humans had read every word very carefully. Far beyond the peaceful systems of the Great Accord, in the cold darkness between galaxy arms, something had been watching and waiting. The Corvani Empire had observed the galaxy's weakness for 50 years, studying every patrol route and defense, planned through stolen communications and careful reconnaissance. High Admiral Zeketh stood in the command center of the dreadnought Swarm Mother, his 6 arms working at different control panels, while his compound eyes tracked dozens of displays. Around him, the massive bridge hummed with activity as thousands of his officers prepared for the greatest military operation in galactic history. The Corvani were insectoids, evolved from hive-minded predators on a harsh world where only the strong survived. Their dark armored bodies moved with mechanical precision as they carried out their duties. Unlike the soft, peaceful species of the inner galaxy, the Corvani understood only strength, dominance, and survival. Report on fleet status, Zeketh commanded, his voice carrying the clicking undertones of his species. All battle groups report ready, High Admiral, his aide responded. 3,000 dreadnoughts, 12,000 cruisers, 50,000 fighters. The planet-killer weapons are armed and ready. Zekth's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. For half a century, the Corvani had built their war machine in secret. While the galaxy celebrated its peaceful treaties, the Empire had been constructing the largest military force in known history. They had never signed the Great Accord. They had never been invited to join the civilized galactic community. The peaceful species had simply assumed that every intelligent race would naturally want to give up warfare and join their happy family of traders and scholars. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. "Begin the first wave," Zekth ordered. Across the outer rim, Corvani fleets dropped out of hyperspace simultaneously at 17 different systems. These were the furthest colonies, small settlements that served as early warning posts for the YI, main galactic territory. They were defended only by the tiny patrol frigates allowed under the Great Accord. The attack on the Tekamari mining colony of New Harvest was typical of what happened across the outer rim. Commander Vellum was enjoying his morning meal when the alarm started screaming. He rushed to the command center of his patrol frigate just in time to see the massive shapes dropping out of hyperspace. "By the 7 moons," he whispered, staring at the displays. "Those ships are enormous." His communications officer was trying to make contact. "Unknown vessels. This is Commander Vellum of the Galactic Patrol Ship Harmony. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions." The response came in the form of energy beams that vaporized the Harmony in seconds. Commander Vellum and his crew of 38 never had time to understand what was happening to them. The same scene played out across 17 systems in the first hour. Patrol ships were destroyed so quickly they couldn't even send warning messages. The Corvani moved with the efficiency of a machine, crushing any resistance before it could form. On New Harvest, the colonists tried to evacuate as the Corvani ships moved into orbit, but there was nowhere to run. The alien vessels began systematically destroying every structure on the planet's surface. Within 6 hours, a thriving colony of 50,000 beings was nothing but smoking ruins. The first warning reached Nexus Prime 8 hours after the attacks began. A single damaged transport ship had escaped from the Veltar research station at Deep Springs. The crew was barely alive, their ship held together by emergency patches and desperate prayers. Kethazan was awakened by emergency calls from the command center. He arrived to find chaos in the normally calm halls of Nexus Prime. Officers from a dozen species were trying to make sense of reports that seemed impossible. 17 systems have gone dark, his aide reported, his scales pale with shock. No communications, no patrol ship check-ins, nothing. Equipment failures? Kethzan asked hopefully. Solar storms? No, sir. We have one survivor ship. They report massive alien vessels attacking without warning. Military ships larger than anything in our database. Kethzan felt cold fear creeping through his body. Military ships? That was impossible. The Great Accord had eliminated all military vessels from the galaxy. No species had the capability for large-scale warfare anymore. Show me the survivor testimony. The Veltar scientist who appeared on the screen was clearly in shock. His normally precise speech was broken and confused. Ships. So many ships. Bigger than our research station. They came out of hyperspace and started shooting. We tried to surrender, but they didn't care. They destroyed everything. Everyone. The testimony went on for 20 minutes. Ships the size of cities. Weapons that could crack planets. An enemy that showed no interest in communication or surrender. An enemy that seemed to exist only to destroy. Within hours, more reports arrived. The second wave of attacks had begun, hitting systems deeper into galactic territory. This time there were more survivors, and their stories painted a clearer picture of the threat. The attackers called themselves the Corvani Empire. They were insectoids from beyond the galaxy's edge, and they had come not to conquer but to exterminate. Every planet they reached was left as a lifeless rock. Every space station was reduced to debris. Every ship that tried to fight or flee was destroyed without mercy. Kethzan stood in the emergency council session as representatives from across the galaxy tried to comprehend what was happening. The peaceful civilization they had built over 3 centuries was being torn apart by an enemy they had never imagined could exist. "How many ships do they have?" asked the Kethmori trade representative. "Intelligence estimates at least 50,000 vessels of various sizes," replied the Saphirian military advisor. "Possibly more. And our defense capabilities." The silence that followed was deafening. The galaxy had exactly 2,947 patrol frigates spread across thousands of systems. Each frigate carried light weapons suitable for stopping smugglers and pirates. None of them were designed to fight a real military force. "We need to evacuate the outer colonies and fall back to the core systems," someone suggested. "Fall back to what?" another voice asked. "We don't have any defensive positions. We dismantled all our fortifications and military stations 2 centuries ago." Kethzon watched the council fall into chaos as the reality of their situation became clear. The Great Accord had given them peace, but it had also left them completely defenseless against anyone who chose not to follow their rules. "What about the member species?" he asked desperately. "Some of them must have hidden military assets." The military advisor shook his head. "We've been monitoring compliance for 300 years. Every species has fully dismantled their war fleets. The only ships that exist are civilian transports and our patrol frigates." As if summoned by their desperation, a new voice spoke from the gallery. Ambassador Sarah Chen had been quietly observing the emergency session from the diplomatic section. "There might be one option," she said, standing up slowly. All eyes turned to the human representative. Chen looked tired and worried, but there was something in her expression that Kethzon couldn't identify. "Earth has always followed the letter of the Great Accord," Chen continued. "We dismantled our military fleet exactly as required, but the Accord has very specific language about what constitutes a military vessel." Kethzon felt a spark of hope. "What are you saying, Ambassador?" Chen's expression grew serious. "I'm saying that humanity may have interpreted the treaty somewhat differently than other species. We need to contact Earth immediately." As Chen left to make her communications, Kethzon wondered what the humans might have hidden. But even if they had secretly kept a few ships, what could one species do against an enemy that had already destroyed 17 star systems? The galaxy's 300 years of peace were ending in fire and darkness. Soon, he feared, there would be nothing left but the silence of dead worlds. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the private communications chamber deep within Nexus Prime, her hands steady as she established a quantum link to Earth. The connection would take precious minutes to establish across the vast distance, but this call would determine the fate of the galaxy. While she waited, Chen reviewed the reports streaming in from the outer systems. The Corvani were moving faster than anyone had expected. Their 4th wave of attacks had begun, and they were getting closer to the populated core worlds with each passing hour. Entire civilizations were being wiped out in a matter of days. The connection stabilized, and a familiar face appeared on the screen. Admiral Jackson Hayes looked older than when Chen had left Earth 6 months ago. His gray hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Sarah, thank God," Hayes said. "We've been monitoring the galactic communications. How bad is it out there?" "Worse than our worst projections, Jack. They're not trying to conquer, they're exterminating everything in their path. The galaxy's defenses are completely useless against them." Hayes nodded grimly. "We figured as much when we saw the fleet compositions in the intercepts. No civilization that's been peaceful for 3 centuries could stand against a real military force." Chen took a deep breath. "Jack, I need to ask the question. Do we still have the retribution?" Hayes was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Sarah, you know the answer to that. The retribution was never classified as a military vessel under the Great Accord definitions. But is it still operational? The AI has been maintaining it in deep storage for 23 years. All systems are green. The crew volunteers are still in cryo-sleep, waiting for the activation signal." Chen felt relief and fear in equal measure. The retribution represented humanity's darkest military achievement, built during the corporate wars when Earth's megacorporations had fought brutal conflicts across the solar system. It was the weapon that had finally ended those wars by being too terrible for anyone to use. "What's the status of Captain Torres?" "Still in cryo with the rest of them. 10,000 of our best military personnel. All volunteers who agreed to sleep until the galaxy needed them again." Hayes paused. "Sarah, are you sure about this? Once we wake the retribution, there's no going back. The galaxy will know what we really are." Chen looked at the tactical displays showing the advancing Corvani fleets. Billions of beings were dying, while the Galactic Council argued about evacuation plans that would never work. The galaxy is about to learn what we are anyway, Jack. The only question is whether they learn it from us helping them, or from the Corvani broadcasting our destruction. Hayes nodded slowly. I'll need authorization from the Defense Council. You have it. I'm transmitting my ambassador codes now. This is a clear and present threat to human survival and galactic civilization. Understood. Activation will begin immediately. Hayes looked directly into the camera. Sarah, you need to prepare them. When the retribution arrives, it's going to shock a lot of people. Chen ended the connection and returned to the council chamber. The emergency session had devolved into chaos as more reports arrived. The Corvani had broken through the second defensive line, such as it was. Their fleets were now only 6 jumps away from major population centers. We need to surrender, the Kethmori representative was saying. Maybe we can negotiate some kind of arrangement. They don't take prisoners, snapped the Veltar ambassador. Every world they've hit has been completely sterilized. There's no one left to negotiate with. Kethzon spotted Chen entering and called for quiet. Ambassador Chen, were you able to contact Earth? Do your people have any ships that could help? With evacuations? Chen walked to the center of the chamber. Every representative in the room was looking at her with desperate hope. She had practiced this moment in her mind during the long journey back from the communications center. The Earth Defense Council has voted to offer military assistance to the galactic community, she said formally. The chamber erupted in confused voices. Military assistance? Humans weren't supposed to have any military capabilities. What kind of assistance? Kethzon asked when the noise died down. We're sending our defense platform to intercept the Corvani fleet. Defense platform? The Veltar, military advisor, looked puzzled. The Accords allow for orbital defense platforms around home worlds, but how would you move it here? Chen had dreaded this moment, but there was no way around it. The Retribution isn't an orbital platform. It's mobile. The silence that followed was complete. Every being in the chamber was staring at her with expressions ranging from confusion to dawning horror. Ambassador, Kethzon said slowly, the Great Accord specifically prohibits mobile military platforms above frigate class. No, Chen replied quietly. The Great Accord prohibits military vessels above frigate class. Article 12A, Section 5 defines a vessel as any spacecraft primarily designed for transportation of personnel or cargo through space. She paused to let that sink in. The Retribution was never designed for transportation. It's a weapons platform that happens to be mobile. Technically, it's classified as a mobile installation, not a vessel. The chamber erupted again, but this time the voices carried anger and betrayal along with fear. You lied to us, shouted the Tekmari representative. We told you exactly the truth, Chen replied firmly. We dismantled every military vessel in our fleet, just as the Accord required. We never promised to dismantle installations that weren't covered by the treaty. Kethzon raised his arms for silence. His scales had turned a deep red color that Chen had learned indicated extreme stress in Zephyrians. Ambassador Chen, exactly. What kind of weapons platform are we talking about? Chen had prepared for this question, but she still hesitated before answering. The Retribution is approximately 8 kilometers in length, carries a crew of 10,000 and mounts weapon systems that were state-of-the-art during our corporate wars. The numbers meant nothing to most of the council members, but the Veltar, military advisor, was frantically working on his data pad. His expression grew more alarmed with each calculation. 8 kilometers, he said in a weak voice. That's larger than most of our space stations. What kind of weapons does it carry? Kinetic accelerators, plasma cannons, fusion missiles. Point. Defense grids and some experimental systems, Chen replied. I'm not qualified to give you technical specifications. The Corvani fleet had been the most terrifying thing any of them could imagine. Now they were learning that one of their own member species had been hiding something even larger and more heavily armed. How long until it arrives? Kethzon asked. Chen checked her chronometer. The Retribution began movement 3 hours ago. It should reach the current front lines in approximately 18 hours. And you believe this one platform can stop the entire Corvani invasion? Chen met his gaze steadily. I believe humanity has never lost a war, Ambassador. The corporate conflicts taught us some very hard lessons about what it takes to survive against overwhelming odds. As if summoned by her words, alarms began sounding throughout the station. The communications officer announced that long-range sensors had detected massive hyperspace signatures moving toward the Rigel system. That's where the Corvani main fleet is gathering, the military advisor reported. Intelligence estimates over 1,500 capital ships. Chen nodded. Then that's where the retribution is going. The council chamber fell silent as everyone contemplated what was about to happen. For 300 years they had believed that warfare was a thing of the past. Now they were about to witness what real military power looked like when unleashed against an enemy that understood only strength. In the depths of space, ancient systems were coming online. Captain Marcus Torres was awakening from 23 years of cryosleep, along with 10,000 of humanity's finest military personnel. The retribution was stretching its mechanical muscles, preparing for the kind of battle that the peaceful galaxy had never imagined. The illusion of safety was about to be shattered forever. Captain Marcus Torres opened his eyes for the first time in 23 years. The cryosleep chamber's gentle hum faded as warming systems brought his body back to full consciousness. Around him, 9,999 other chambers were going through the same revival process. Torres sat up slowly, his muscles protesting after decades of inactivity. But his mind was sharp, trained by years of military conditioning to snap immediately into focus. The first thing he saw was the status display floating above his chamber. Condition red, hostile contact, all hands to battle stations. Well, he said to himself, it's about time. The Retribution's medical bay was controlled chaos as 10,000 military personnel went through rapid revival procedures. Torres made his way to the command center, stopping briefly to review the tactical reports that had been downloaded to his personal display. The numbers were sobering. The Corvani Empire had over 50,000 military vessels of various sizes, and they had already destroyed 28 star systems. The galactic community's entire defense force consisted of fewer than 3,000 patrol frigates. Torres reached the bridge and settled into the captain's chair that had been waiting for him for over 2 decades. Around him, his senior staff were taking their positions with the smooth efficiency of a well-trained unit. Status report, he ordered. Commander Lisa Park, his executive officer, was already at her station reviewing incoming data. We're 18 hours out from the Rigel system, where intelligence shows the main Corvani fleet is gathering. Estimated enemy strength is 1,500 capital ships, supported by approximately 8,000 smaller vessels. Torres nodded. Those were better odds than some of the corporate war battles. What do we know about their capabilities? Long-range scans show they're using energy weapons, primarily plasma-based systems. Their hulls appear to be standard crystalline metallic composites. No evidence of advanced defensive technologies. They're primitives, said Lieutenant Commander Chen from the tactical station. Advanced enough to build big ships, but they haven't had to fight anyone who could shoot back in 50 years. Torres smiled grimly. The Corvani had made the same mistake that had cost so many factions during the corporate wars. They had confused size with effectiveness, numbers with tactical superiority. Weapons status? All primary systems online, reported the weapons officer. Kinetic accelerators at full charge, plasma cannons ready, missile tubes loaded. The experimental systems are also operational, though we haven't had a chance to test them in actual combat. Torres had overseen the development of those experimental systems before going into cryosleep. They represented 20 years of human weapons research, designed specifically for the kind of large-scale fleet engagement they were about to face. Communications. Get me a channel to the Corvani fleet. The communications officer worked for several minutes before shaking his head. Sir, they're not responding to any standard frequencies. It appears they have no interest in talking. Just as well, Torres replied. We're not here to negotiate. The Retribution dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Rigel system, exactly 18 hours after leaving Earth. What they found there was the largest gathering of military ships in galactic history. The Corvani fleet was arranged in a massive formation around Rigel Prime, the system's main inhabited planet. 1,500 dreadnoughts formed the core of the fleet, each one over 2 kilometers long and bristling with weapons. Around them, thousands of smaller cruisers and destroyers moved in complex patterns. On the planet below, the evacuation was already underway. Millions of Rigelian civilians were trying to escape in whatever ships they could find, but the Corvani had positioned their fleet to block most escape routes. "They're hurting the civilians," observed Commander Park. "Keeping them trapped so they can destroy them all at once." Torres studied the tactical display with the calm intensity that had made him legendary during the corporate wars. He saw the Corvani formation, analyzed their movements, and identified their weaknesses in less than 30 seconds. "They're thinking like a swarm," he said. "Overwhelming numbers, brute force tactics. They've never had to fight someone who could hurt them back." The Corvani had noticed the Retribution's arrival. The massive alien fleet was beginning to turn toward this new threat, their formation shifting like a living organism responding to a potential predator. High Admiral Zekth stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the single ship that had dared to approach his fleet. The vessel was large by the standards of this weak galaxy, but it was still just one ship against 1,500. "What is that thing?" he asked his tactical officer. "Unknown configuration, High Admiral. It's approximately 8 kilometers long, but the hull design doesn't match any vessel in our database." Zekth's mandibles clicked with amusement. "The soft species of this galaxy have finally found the courage to send a real warship against us. Show them what happens to those who oppose." The Empire. The order went out across the Corvani fleet. Energy weapons began charging as 1,500 dreadnoughts prepared to obliterate the single vessel that had dared to challenge them. Torres watched the enemy fleet's movements with professional interest. "They're going to try to overwhelm us with concentrated fire. Classic swarm tactic." "Orders, sir?" asked the weapons officer. Torres leaned back in his command chair and smiled. It was the same smile that had terrified corporate executives and enemy commanders throughout the solar system. "Let's show them how humans fight." Fire Plan Alpha. The Retribution's first salvo was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The kinetic accelerators hurled streams of dense metal projectiles at significant fractions of the speed of light. Each projectile hit with the force of a nuclear weapon, but the Retribution fired thousands of them in the first few seconds. The Corvani formation disintegrated. Dreadnoughts that had seemed invincible moments before were torn apart by impacts they couldn't even detect until it was too late. The aliens' energy shields, designed to stop plasma weapons and particle beams, were useless against solid projectiles, moving at relativistic speeds. But Torres was just getting started. As the Corvani fleet tried to reorganize, the Retribution's plasma cannons opened fire. Unlike the relatively primitive energy weapons the aliens used, human plasma systems had been perfected during decades of brutal warfare. Each shot was precisely targeted, designed to exploit weaknesses in enemy armor and shields. The experimental weapons came online last. Gravity manipulators reached across space to crush alien ships like empty cans. Quantum disruptors tore apart the molecular bonds holding enemy hulls together. Temporal accelerators created pockets of fast time that aged Corvani vessels into scrap metal in seconds. High Admiral Zekth watched in horror as his invincible fleet was systematically destroyed. In less than 10 minutes, over 300 of his dreadnoughts had been reduced to debris. The single human vessel was moving through his formation like a scythe through wheat, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. "All ships, focus fire on the human vessel," he commanded desperately. But when the Corvani weapons finally reached the Retribution, they found that human defensive technology was as advanced as their offensive systems. Energy shields absorbed plasma beams and deflected particle weapons. Point defense grids shot down incoming missiles with mechanical precision. Armor plating that had been forged in the fires of corporate warfare shrugged off attacks that would have destroyed any other ship in the galaxy. Torres studied the tactical display as the battle progressed. The Corvani were brave. He had to give them that. Even as their fleet was being torn apart, they kept fighting. But bravery without skill was just another way to die. "Commander Park, signal the evacuation ships." Tell them the exit routes are clear. Below them, Rigel Prime's civilian ships began streaming away from the planet. The Corvani formation had been so thoroughly disrupted that the escape routes were wide open. The battle lasted 47 minutes. When it ended, the Corvani Empire's main invasion fleet had ceased to exist. 1,500 dreadnoughts had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris. Less than a dozen ships escaped to hyperspace, carrying word of their defeat back to whatever dark corner of the galaxy had spawned them. The Retribution hung motionless in space, its hull scarred but intact. Around it floated the wreckage of the largest military fleet in known history. Torres opened a communications channel to Nexus Prime. "This is Captain Torres of the Terran defense platform Retribution. The immediate threat has been neutralized. We are standing by for further orders." The galaxy had just learned what human warfare looked like. The lesson would not be easily forgotten. The emergency council session at Nexus Prime was unlike anything in the station's 300-year history. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in stunned silence as they watched the aftermath footage from the Rigel system. Where the Corvani invasion fleet had gathered just hours before, there was now only debris and empty space. Ambassador Kethzon stared at the tactical displays with scales that had turned pale gray with shock. The numbers seemed impossible. 1,500 Corvani dreadnoughts destroyed in less than an hour. 8,000 support vessels obliterated. The entire invasion fleet wiped out by a single human platform. "How?" whispered the Veltar military advisor. "How is this possible?" Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the center of the chamber, no longer the humble representative of a peaceful species. The mask had been stripped away, revealing something that made even the bravest council members uncomfortable. "You asked us to join your civilization," she said quietly. "You asked us to give up warfare and embrace peace, but you never asked us to forget how to fight." The Kethmori trade representative was frantically reviewing legal documents on his datapad. "The Great Accord specifically prohibits weapons of mass destruction. What we saw in that battle was conventional weapons technology," Chen interrupted. "Advanced, yes. Effective, certainly. But nothing that violates the treaty we signed. Kinetic projectiles, plasma weapons, and defensive systems, all within the parameters of the Accord." "Those weren't conventional weapons," protested the Tekmari ambassador. "We saw ships being torn apart at the molecular level." Chen's expression didn't change. "The Accord prohibits specific weapons categories: antimatter bombs, stellar manipulators, planet crackers, and biological warfare. Everything the Retribution used falls under conventional military technology as defined by the treaty." Kethzon found his voice at last. "Ambassador Chen, your people deceived us. You let us believe you were a peaceful species while hiding weapons that could destroy our entire civilization." "We are a peaceful species," Chen replied firmly. "Humanity has not started a single conflict since joining the galactic community. We have honored every aspect of the Great Accord. We dismantled our military fleet and embraced civilian trade and exploration." She paused, looking around the chamber at the fearful faces watching her. "But we never forgot that peace only exists when someone is strong enough to defend it. You created a beautiful civilization built on the idea that everyone would choose to be peaceful. We admired that ideal, and we were happy to be part of it. But we also remembered that not everyone in the universe shares your ideals." The communications officer approached Kethzon with a priority message. "Sir, we're receiving reports from the Outer Rim. The surviving Corvani ships have fled beyond our sensor range. Long-range reconnaissance shows their remaining fleets are retreating toward the galactic edge." Chen nodded with satisfaction. "The Corvani understand only strength. When they see that strength, they retreat. That's how predators work." "And what happens now?" asked the Rigelian representative, whose world had just been saved by human intervention. "Do we become your subjects? Do you demand tribute for your protection?" Chen looked genuinely surprised. "Subjects? Tribute? Ambassador, we're members of the galactic community, not conquerors. The Retribution exists to defend the Accord, not replace it." But the fear in the chamber was palpable. Every representative was doing the same calculation. If humans could destroy the Corvani so easily, what could they do to anyone else who opposed them? Kethzon voiced what everyone was thinking. How do we know you won't use that weapon against us? How do we know this isn't just the beginning of human domination? Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 300 years of human restraint. Because if we wanted to conquer the galaxy, we would have done it already. The retribution has existed for 23 years. We could have activated it at any time and swept aside your patrol fleets like they were toys. Instead, we chose to sleep, waiting for the day when you would need us. She walked to the center of the chamber, looking directly at each representative in turn. Humanity spent centuries fighting itself before we learned the value of peace. We know what war costs, not just in lives but in the soul of a species. We don't want to rule you. We want to protect the civilization we've all built together. The Veltar military advisor was studying his tactical assessments. Ambassador, our intelligence estimates suggest that the retribution could defeat the combined patrol fleets of every member species simultaneously. Probably, Chen agreed without emotion. But why would we want to? You're our friends, our trading partners, our fellow explorers of the galaxy. The Corvani were exterminators who showed no mercy to civilians. There's a significant difference. Over the following hours, reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy. The Corvani retreat was complete. Their remaining fleets had disappeared, beyond the galactic rim, presumably returning to whatever dark space they had emerged from. The immediate crisis was over, but the galaxy had been fundamentally changed. The comfortable illusion of safety through treaties had been shattered. Everyone now knew that there were threats in the universe that didn't care about agreements or diplomatic solutions. More importantly, they knew that one of their own member species possessed the power to defend against those threats. The final session of the Emergency Council convened a week later. The agenda had only one item: amendments to the Great Accord. Chen stood once again before the assembled representatives, but this time the atmosphere was different. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with gratitude from the species whose worlds had been saved, and a grudging respect for human military capability. The Council has reached a decision, Kethzon announced. The Great Accord will be amended to create a new military structure. Humanity will be designated as the official protector of galactic civilization, with the authority to maintain defensive forces necessary for that role. Chen nodded formally. Earth accepts this responsibility. The retribution will take position at the galactic rim, monitoring for external threats. We will also begin training programs for any species that wishes to develop their own defensive capabilities. And the existing patrol forces? Asked the Veltar representative. Will be expanded and better equipped, Chen replied. The galaxy needs to be able to defend itself, not rely entirely on one species. Humanity will provide training and technology, but every world should have the means to protect its own citizens. The vote was unanimous. The Great Accord was amended for the first time in 3 centuries. As the council session ended, Kethzon approached Chen privately. His scales had returned to their normal blue-green color, but his manner was still cautious. Ambassador, I need to ask you something directly. Are there other human military assets we don't know about? Chen considered the question carefully. The retribution is our primary strategic weapon, but it's not our only one. Humanity learned long ago not to put all our defensive capabilities in one place. How many others? Enough, Chen replied simply. Ambassador, the galaxy is vast and full of unknown dangers. The Corvani were just one threat from one direction. There are things in dark space that make the Corvani look like children playing with toys. Kethzon felt a chill run through his body. How do you know this? Because humanity has been listening to the void between galaxies for 50 years. We've heard things out there, seen things on the edge of our sensors. The universe is not a safe place, Kethzon. It never was. You just had the luxury of not knowing it. Chen looked out at the stars visible through the station's observation ports. But now you do know. And now you have guardians who remember how to fight the darkness. The galaxy welcomed peace, and we helped you keep it. But peace without strength is just another word for helplessness. She turned back to Kethzon with a slight smile. The illusion is shattered, but the reality is much better. You're not defenseless anymore. You never have to be again. Far at the galaxy's edge, the Retribution took up its eternal watch. Captain Torres and his crew had returned to their duties with the satisfaction of a job well done. The stars were quiet once more, but now that quiet was protected by those who understood the price of peace. The galaxy had learned that civilization and military strength were not opposites. Sometimes, they were the same thing.